Welcome to the Sāyana Society. In this episode, we speak with Rama Bijapurkar, acclaimed business strategist, market researcher, and preeminent thought leader on consumer India. Rama Bijapurkar is the best-selling author of multiple books on consumer India, most famously, We Are Like That Only, Understanding the Logic of Consumer India, and most recently, Lilliput Land, How Small is Driving India's Mega Consumption Story. She also serves as an independent director on the board of multiple blue chip companies such as Cummins India, Mahindra and Mahindra Financial Services, Sun Pharma, and Apollo Hospitals Enterprises. Having spent over 3 decades researching, writing, and advising on the many realms of consumer India, Rama Ma'am describes her life's work as bringing the people's view to business strategy and public policy. I was lucky to be able to learn from Rama Ma'am on her long journey through consumer India. I hope you find the conversation enriching. As usual, the guests or I may own securities discussed in the podcast. All opinions expressed in the podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only and must not be construed as investment advice. Enjoy. Welcome, Rama Ma'am. You describe your life's work as bringing the people's view to business strategy and public policy. What do you mean by that?
I mean that a lot of the economy and public policy is all about macro numbers, how big we are, macro variables, macro indicators of GDP growth is a classic example. Similarly, public policy is all about how many kilometers of road you built and how many toilets you built and how many tolls you built. And it's all about either macro indicators or supply side data. So what I'm interested in my work is to really sit and say, what does this mean for people? And if you were to take people into consideration, would you still, then you obviously you would not focus on how many toilets you built, but how many toilets that were functioning with water facility you would build and where you would build it. Or similarly, you would understand the fruits of income distribution by strata of society, by geography, or you would not declare victory on inclusion, but you would look at how many people there are who are financially included and live within 1 kilometer of an all-weather road and have a pakka house and have children in school and have surplus income. So you would start looking at indicators that involved how people earn, spend, save, live, think, and that's really what I mean.
What got you interested in consumer India? I mean, what were your early influences?
I went to IIM Ahmedabad to business school basically at 18 and finished at 20. So I don't think I had too many influences at that time. But I started out my life as a market researcher. And again, most things in life are accidental. So I think that year when I was graduating from Ahmedabad, none of the banks came. And that was all pre-liberalization. So there were a small set of choices. We were a small group of students. And I think the banks didn't come, and I was not a hardcore finance person. And many marketing jobs didn't want women. It still happened in those days. And what was left was the service industry of advertising, market research, and so on. So I started off with advertising, spent a year, did not like it at all. It seemed to be a fairly pointless role that I was doing. And then I moved into market research, which I completely loved. And it started from there. And market research, as you know, is all about people and how they think and what they do. So that then led to using information about people for decision making. And it's that thread that is the common thread or the common vector along which the rest of my work has followed.
Right. Was C.K. Prahlad an important influence in shaping the way you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had I've just been lucky because I've had many gurus and mentors over time. Everybody who's taught you a little bit or given you a guru mantra. CK was actually my teacher at IIM Ahmedabad. And as I used to tell him in later years that had I known you were going to be famous, I would have paid more attention in your class. But CK was just extraordinary. I mean, I always marveled at how he stayed in how he was an academic in an office and he gave the world the idea of core competence, the idea of competing for the future, the idea of the bottom of the pyramid. I mean, how can someone who is sitting in one place have so much prolific influence over thinkers around the world? He was also just enormously bright and articulate. So at one point, he was giving the Lal Bahadur Shastri Memorial Lecture, and he called me and he said, can you figure out how the Dabbawala system works? And I said to him that actually they don't tell anybody how that whole system, the system of coding and stuff works, so I don't really know. So he said, oh, I'm so disappointed that you have such little intellectual curiosity. And I said, okay, let's go and find out. And then I caught up with a friend who's no more called Ashok. That meant that every only that much information that was needed. So if you were doing the last mile of a building society, you didn't need the full address, you only needed the flat number. So you only had as much information as was needed for. So if you were doing the interchange at the other, you only needed to know what you were interchanging to. So I explained all this to him, and I remember he gave me a check of 10,000, which is a large amount in those days, because I said we need expenses. And then when I told him this, he said, "Oh, this is like TCP/IP protocol, where every time you handshake, certain information gets passed." And I remember telling him, "That's what makes you the great CK Prahlad, and I'm just the hack." Later, when I was writing my first book, he said to me that write for yourself; it will give you clarity, which I think is actually phenomenal advice. And he said, if you actually write this book, he said, I will write the foreword to the book, which he did, and so on. So I often told him that I'm like Eklavya, the preacher in the Ramayana who remotely studied archery. And he would say, but I haven't asked for your thumb. So yeah, I was very, very inspired by just the way he thought and his mind. And
I was really inspired by his forward to your first book, where he, really asked you to listen to the consumer, to the Indian consumer. Um, that leads me to my next question. So, what explains the complexity of the consumer market in India? I mean, why are so few companies able to crack the code sustainably?
But just to close out on the previous one, he wrote, listen to the logic of consumer India from within. And I remember saying to him that, gosh, I wish I had written that line. I just wrote the book, but that was the core message. So anyway, that was him. I think what makes it complex and, it's just so many things. One is, of course, that we're a hydra-headed monster. There are just, as everybody knows, the Joan Robbins quote, which has been quoted in many ways by many leading lights, that everything you say about India is the opposite is true. Shashi Tharoor says that the true writes that any truism can be contradicted by another truism, and even our motto Satyameva Jayate, truth alone triumphs. He says the question remains whose truth. So that's one thing, because we are such a land of contrasts, and that makes it complicated. Secondly, we have monster consumers who want high performance at a low price, and companies, of course, want profit. So I think squaring that circle or balancing that triangle is very, very hard to do. And we are also very scattered. I mean, it's a long tail of rich people, right? They live in rural India, they live in small towns, they live in big towns. So it's not like China, somewhere we have neatly corridors of development where people are rich. So it is, and finally, it's also the way we change and evolve. It's again a CKism that India morphs, and so it changes in a tricky, sneaky way from inside. And you think nothing's changing, but actually it's changing bit by bit by bit, and suddenly the tipping point's been reached. So for all these and many more reasons, it's not an easy market, and I think most people don't have the stomach to make for India.
I mean, the popular mental model is that, as all the rich people scattered across India, as they agglomerate towards the metros, with modernity and with the westernization, that would make it easier for companies to address the richer people. But you disagree with that in the book.
Yes, I absolutely do, because I'm saying they're not coming to the metros. In fact, now with better infrastructure, internet, wider footprint, they're preferring to stay in their huge villas in their small towns. And I think I also say that we're not getting westernized necessarily. We're doing this as well as that in our own little khichdi way.
Yeah. So consumption requires a strong, stable, resilient middle class. Where does India's middle class stand?
So I've been writing of late, along with a friend and partner in writing, called Yuva Hedrick Wong, who used to be the chief economist of MasterCard and later of the MasterCard Center. He lives in Canada. He's a Canadian who knows India extremely well. And I think we've been saying that we're a little bit tired of listening to of reading stuff about the middle class where people say the middle class is anybody between income X and income Y. And the X and Y ranges as much as a factor of 10. And, that makes no sense to me. And so then we started saying, why study the middle class and what is the middle class? And so the middle class is essentially has to also be defined by people who have a certain amount of surplus income to reinvest in their families. They have to have stable and predictable income, which means you need to have a skill that gives you a job, that gives you a stable and predictable income. And you need to be resilient also, which means you have some savings so you don't just fall off into poverty every time there's a bit of a hiccup. And so once you put all these criteria together, then you find that maybe the top 10% of India is definitely what we would call a middle class. And maybe 20% if you stretch it a bit, but somewhere within that number. So if India has 308 million households with about 4.5 people per household, just as an average, you can do the math. Then you have about 10% definitely middle class, 20% kind of getting there. So that's roughly where the middle class is. And the irony is that it is actually India's upper class that qualifies to be a middle class.
I really like the way you framed it in the book about the middle class not being equal to middle India, and
Yes.
and the middle class being more the top 20 percentile or the top 40
Yes.
percentile population.
Yeah.
So how have things evolved with respect to the middle class over the last 3 decades?
There is a definite difference in the quality of the middle class, which even the late economist Subir Gokaran has written about. I think I've quoted him in my book. So essentially, in the early days, the people who qualified for all these were, in fact, it tells better in a story. I was once interviewing for the scholarship program. I was interviewing candidates, part of a panel interviewing candidates for the scholarship program of a very large of a very large business house. And they were giving away scholarships to young people who wanted to do a postgraduate degree in a really good college anywhere overseas. And I was struck by how many of them, almost all of them, were from government servant fathers, which was either the railways or the State Bank of India or the army, like I'm an army child, or the IAS or the local government services of various kinds. And so you had even the State Bank of India, the public sector banks or public sector companies, oil companies. So basically, government is an employer. And these were people who grew up all over the country, who understood integrated India, who came from a certain ethos and mindset of value system because of where they worked and what they did, where their parents worked and what they did. And but now I think because we are seeing fewer and fewer people in government jobs and so on, I think now the new middle class is actually people who are in business, who have their own businesses, who are not necessarily employed with a large institution or have come up through an institutional value system. And so I think the new middle class will be quite different, perhaps more apathetic, perhaps more money oriented. So if you look at social capital and cultural capital, economic capital and cultural capital, we will probably see more economic capital, maybe a different kind of cultural capital. So I think the middle class is going to be different.
Why is occupation an important parameter in understanding the middle class?
Very simply, how you earn. Firstly, how you earn determines how much you earn and how stable you earn. So if you're a construction worker that has to show up every day to earn, then there's a certain kind of earning pattern you have, right? Or if you're a plumber, carpenter, electrician, own account workers, as the ILO calls them, if you are all those, then you have a certain amount of uncertainty in how you earn, and also you don't have the kind of skill levels that you have. So if you look at all the variables that influence consumption as well, very early on we used to define the socio-economic classification in India, which was one of the first things I had participated in as a young market researcher. It was an industry study. And we found that occupation into education of the chief wage earner best determined the tone and tenor of the household, what it consumed, how it consumed. So, for example, whether you read newspapers and you bought them or not, whether you would take your child to a bookshop and spend the afternoon there, whether you would, how much money you were going to invest in education and house and experiences and holidays in family related stuff. So over time, that construct, we went away from it because we found that a lot of people, a crane operator earned more than a junior executive. So this occupation to education didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But now, then they move to a system of just durables. How many durables do you have? But that is an unstable system because every time you have a Republic Day discount sale, the number of durables you have increases. So as a result of that, they're now back to a new system, which is the highest education of the female in the household and the occupation of the chief wage earner. Because how you earn is determines also what you value, what you believe, what kind of work you do, because that is the way it is in India, and we are a little bit of a hierarchical society also, and also the structure of employment that we have. So that's why I feel employment is a good way to look at it. I mean, even if you read obituary notices, they say so and so in brackets IIT IIM.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the poor guy's died. I mean, is that the best you have to say about him? But IIT IIM defines a lot of things.
So what explains the complexity of income measurement? Yeah. And could you also talk about your time with price?
What explains the complexity of income measurement is that most people don't understand. If you go to a household and you ask the housewife, for example, that what is the total household income? She may not know because her husband may not tell her. She may not understand. Plus, there are issues of if you're getting a company house, is that income? If you get PF and gratuity, is that income? She might believe that whatever money her husband is giving her every month, which is net of EMIs and everything, is actually income. So firstly, I think people need help to be able to break it down to say, okay, let's sit down and calculate your income together. The second thing we have found always in all my years in market research is that even if you do doorstep measurements in whatever form, it is what statisticians call a valid indicator, but not a reliable one. What does that mean? It means that if 5 people go and ask the question, say 5 different people ask the same question with the same sampling, you will get the same answer. So it is measuring a certain kind of income. Is that God's own truth? Even formal, more complex surveys of the kind the price does not explain it. But even so, it is a little better at getting a more valuable, more valid reading. And eventually, of course, the entire if you take the survey data and if you multiply everybody's incomes with the total sample they represent, you will still get an income number that is about 50 to 55% of the total income according to macro government indicators. So even the national sample survey that the government does of expenditure is off from the expenditure you calculate from the GDP calculation. So there is a bit of an issue there. But the people research in India's consumer economy, I wanted to call it and citizen environment, but it was too long a name, was something that, so I spent a lot of time in and around NCAR, the National Council of Applied Economic Research, and they're the people who did what they call income expenditure surveys. So it sits at the confluence. The economists were looking at it, and I was like, oh, great. So the economists are looking at people data, household data, and of course, the marketing guys were looking at household data. And so I tried to do much more with that within that system because to try and get business to fund it and own it in some way and so on, which had partial success, but over time there were many institutional issues that they had in terms of what they wanted to do. So then I thought, so there was a person who was who used to do those surveys there, Dr. Shukla, he used to manage those surveys there. So I said to him that why don't we set up our own think tank? And he said, fine. So we called it a think tank and a fact tank, which is really what Pew does. And then I said, I will hustle and let's try and get money. And so whenever we got money from wherever we got money, we went and did it. And then I remember one time we were funded quite well by the Tata Trust, I think once or maybe twice, because it costs a lot of money to do this and so on. But there aren't a lot of people willing to pay for this data. They weren't at that point in time, or maybe we just marketed it badly. And then I also felt that we were not doing a good enough job. So I felt that, for example, I think that the response time was also not enough. We didn't have enough researchers. We never built a team. And I'm at the age where I say that if something doesn't fulfill its destiny, then it's time to let it go. So, for example, when Yogi Adityanath said that we've created I remember he gave an interview, the Chief Minister of UP, and he said that we've created a new caste called the welfare caste, and we're not fighting on caste. I wanted price, and I was the non-executive chair, so you can push them up to a point. So I said to them, and I had 99% shareholding at that time, but it still wasn't enough. And I said to them that, hey, listen, why don't we very quickly look at all our data and figure out what is this welfare caste? Out of the 112 schemes that people have, how many people are there who benefit from how many of these schemes, and let's size that up. So that's the kind of stuff that we wanted to do. And that took time. Plus, it was limited to, they didn't expand in terms of bringing in other disciplines. So, for example, you need an anthropologist, sociologist, you need a network of people working in the system. So then I thought, instead of paining everybody and saying, do more, the best thing to do is so I gifted, I set it up as a not-for-profit organization because I said that will keep us honest and force us to do really important work as compared to going and doing custom-built surveys and making a lot of money. And so then I gifted my entire shareholding to them and said that continue to do as well as you can. And then I've been sort of working with different teams now to do different stuff. So it's actually change is sometimes good. Yeah. Even though at that time it seems like the end of the world.
Right. So I mean, 3 decades back when you were starting out, I mean, what was the consumer research scene in India like? I mean, was it primitive? At least that's the heuristic that I have.
Actually, more than 3 decades. It's going to be
okay.
Yeah, I have to put a number to it to see that. Was it primitive? Interestingly, there were very few market research agencies. There were very few clients. Okay, but interestingly, I think compared to now, we did more sophisticated work.
Okay.
Far more sophisticated work, because I think now over time. And even if you looked at the talent at that time, I mean, the number of people from leading edge business schools is an indicator, and highest level of statistical understanding and training who came together to that industry. It was a powerhouse of talent, and that's where. So we tied up and did simulated test market modeling. We tied up with somebody else overseas and did, semiotics. I mean, I remember publishing every year in this thing called the European Society of Opinion and Market Research, which was the flagship of the industry. And every year at the annual program, I would go and publish one paper. So I think we did a lot of exciting work. I remember we were doing far more sophisticated conjoint analysis then. Now people say conjoint what? And so I think in those days, because the product was not the differentiator, you really had to kind of try and find ways by which you could differentiate and you could really understand. And there were few clients, there was enormous talent on either side, and that happened. Now it's become a bit of a factory shop, and I think that it's a different kind of work, but now also the business model seems to be much more syndicated work as compared to customized work. And when you do customized problem solving, as you know, your finest work comes out. So now it's larger, it's bigger, it's more internet enabled, but a lot of the talent has fled to better and higher paying industries like private equity and various other places. So it's yeah. So some stuff is not as good as it used to be. I mean, I call it the the Nielsen, for example, is the guru god of doing standard syndicated studies and great EBITDA. We never made money, unfortunately. So I don't know whether we were losers or winners. We were primitive businesses that did really nice work in a small market. So maybe it's the Nielsenization of the industry. A lot of the individuals sold out to larger companies. Then it became part of APAC, and then it became cookie cutter. But you get far more interesting syndicated data coming out now on tap, but you have far less talent, is my sense.
I mean, was HUL commissioning the survey, the breaking point for consumer research in India in a way?
HUL was the patron saint, okay? And there were a few companies. You could not run a research agency if you did not have ITC, if you did not have Brooklyn, and if you didn't have HUL as your clients, because they were the big spenders. And then there were a couple of others. There was Union Carbide and so on. But HUL actually had a serious amount of investment in in research and building the research industry. In fact, I remember that first socioeconomic classification study which the industry body did. We were sitting in Hindustan Lever House as space was given to us there to do it. So I think they did. I think they set up the first ever consumer panel. ITC set up the first ever smoker panel. So I think giving money for things for experimentation, for tying up with people overseas who would tell you how to do it better. I think none of that would have been possible if it weren't for these big people who actually commissioned it. So they were, in a sense, the patron, the Maibap of the industry in a very positive way. They were looking to develop the industry.
How do you see the future of consumer research in India? Where is it headed?
I think the future is, firstly, I'm seeing that it's going more and more towards the internet, and I keep asking this question, that you have to then be very conscious of what samples you're getting, what sample biases you're getting. I'll give you a story. I saw an ad for a bank where there was this little child who went to a really sour-faced, scary-looking shopkeeper and said, they were really frightened children. They said, "Will you give us a toffee?" And he gave them a toffee, and he also gave them a little coin back, and they were really thrilled. And so they were talking about how great the bank was. And I wrote to the CEO of the bank, and I said, let's say it's a her. And I said to her that, look, why would you want a brand personality that is so khadus and so sour-faced? And why would that be the brand of your bank? And she said, oh, we didn't find any negative responses on any of the social media, on any of the normal places where people savage you. So I said to her that if your target group is high net worth individuals, how many high net worth individuals would spend their time commenting on an ad for a bank in the social media? Please let me know. And to her credit, she said, she came back 4 weeks later and she said, I've actually commissioned qualitative research, customized, and this is the rationale for what they said. So that's another story altogether. But the question of samples continues to remain with me. So if you have like 2.5 million names and addresses of internet addresses of people, and you pick a random sample from there, you're still you have to know. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying you have to know what that bias is. You have to do a lot of, in the old days when we did consumer panels, we did a lot of experimentation. And there was a lot of experimentation in the world where if you had a willing panel and an unwilling panel, that is people you bought with money and people who wanted to be part of it, were you getting different answers, etc., etc. So I think we need to do a lot more work around that. And secondly, I think the whole customization and problem solving area has probably gone to the consulting brigade and out of the research agencies. That said, there are still some very good agencies that do operate, but we have to see the coming of age of market research again. Right now, it is not even needed because we are not in the era of competition in this country as yet. When we get to the era of competition, then I think we'll see another round of flowering of the research industry.
Right. See, you are quite critical of the work that the global consulting firms have been doing. So what are they getting wrong?
Yes, well, I have a daughter who works in one of them, and she says every time you open your mouth, it's a career-limiting move for me. But anyway, no, I am only critical. I'm critical of a few things. One is that, and as I've written in my book, they're also changing their tone over time, because earlier it was India will evolve like everybody else. And in my first book, I wrote that a typical consulting report of a global firm has per capita income on one side and per capita consumption of every damn thing on the other. And so the assumption is that India is at per capita X and is consuming colas Y. And when India gets to per capita Z, because Greece consumes that amount of cola, we will consume that. Now, to me, intellectually, that is a patently stupid argument. And as I've often said, maybe if you looked at per capita toilets on the road, we would drink more Coke if you knew how to go to the loo, especially if you're a woman on a long distance journey. Similarly, if we are at the same level as Poland was, whatever, 30 years ago, it doesn't mean that we consume like Poland did 30 years ago. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. So one is I have a big problem with this per capita based thinking. Secondly, I know and we know that India leapfrogs. right? And I also talk about the champion's disadvantage of why some multinationals think that the race they're going to run now is the same race they ran when it became champion. So Microsoft became the champion in the PC race that it ran then. Today it's all mobile, right? So it's different things. And the third thing that I'm also saying to them is that when you're putting out all this income data, please show me where you put out this data from. Show me the survey, show me the details of the survey. Can we have a sampling design out there? And can we have a bit more transparency? And again, they say that they look at, I know that it's a favorite economist thing as well, that you look at analogous economist as in not the magazine, but in people who study economics and are working in the field, that there is a particular sample distribution that can be borrowed across countries. And as I've said, if you have party X, as you can see, even in our elections that is debating now, if it's party X and party Y, I guarantee you we'll have very different income distributions if they follow through with what they say they're going to do. So I'm saying it's not simplistic, and that you have to start looking at India very, very differently, which they're all now beginning to say, which I say in my book. That is music to my ears that you're singing a different tune. I actually love them, but I have some disagreements with them on how they think about things.
Great, got it. So you describe an attitude and mindset shift in Indian consumption from this is what I have and how do I manage the best within it to this is what I want and so how do I manage to get it? Stretching for more and not settling for less. How have Indian attitudes to consumption evolved over the last 3 or 4 decades?
Firstly, I think consumption is morally purified. I was just talking to a friend of mine who's my age, and I said to her that I saw dark glasses that were worth $300 at a duty free, and I just couldn't bring myself to spend $300 on dark glasses. And I came back and I said this to my daughter, who is a millennial, and she said, "Oh God, you and your 1991 mentality." She said, "Why don't you just buy it?" And I said, "No, when you're giving away your old ones, you give them to me." So I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said her children say exactly the same to them. That so just the benchmarks of what is sensible expenditure, what is indulgence, what is it shameful to spend on, what is it okay to spend on. I think a lot of that has changed over time because they know they're born into a different era. So consumption and spending has been, in my case, all the years you're growing up, if you got whacked with duties at every budget time because shampoo was luxury, lipstick was a luxury, you came with the mindset that said spending is bad. Plus, you're socialist. There's so many poor people. Do you really want to spend, a month and a half of your driver's salary on entertainment for 2 days, stuff like that. So I think some of that has definitely gone away. Consumption is a good thing. It's a problem solver. So I think people want to consume, and there is no stigma against it. And I also think, as you're saying, that it is about experiences. It's stretch for more, certainly not settle for less. So I don't buy the moped that I can afford, but let's see if I can get the bike that I want. And if I can't get the bike that I want new, then rather than buy a lower brand, maybe I look at a second-hand bike which has done less time, or let me borrow a little more money and buy the latest model so that then it will last me another 4 years. So I think that's where our mindsets have changed. I think borrowing also is no longer, oh my God, are you in debt? I mean, as compared to that, it's seen as normal working capital for living, loan liya, credit card pe thoda turnaround kiya. So many of those fundamental attitudes have changed. I think we're seeing more pronounced aspiration as well, and we're seeing people much clearer about them building stories of how. In fact, we've just done a youth survey with an anthropologist professor from IIT Madras. She's done the survey, and it's an ethnographic study. And as she says that as they build the story of their lives, they are very clear what model, what series iPhone they're going to buy, what the car they're going to drive, what they're going to do. So I remember once giving a talk in a school in Holland, a college, and one of the Dutch anthropologists, she said to me, "It's so interesting." She said it was on the bottom of the pyramid. She said, "Why do you think of people in India as consumers and not as citizens?" And I thought that's an interesting question. And even people think of themselves as consumers. And I realized that being a consumer, you get far more rights than you do as a citizen. At least you used to in the early days, right? And so as a consumer, you can decide how many tankers of water will come where and whether it's going to come on time or not. But as a citizen, you cannot ensure that the municipality delivers it to you. So there's something there.
So the refrigerators versus air conditioners in your book was an
I've
interesting.
really read my book very closely, I have to tell you.
Yeah, I've read all your books.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's just refrigerators versus air conditioners. Really interesting case study on how aspiration for consumer India skews towards utility tools that helps enhance earning power versus these simple
Yes.
creature comforts. So how do you see that, and how is that a model for understanding consumer India?
Now, these are what I call productivity tools or utilities. So, for example, and this is what consumers tell me or people tell me all the time. So I ask my maid that, why can't you come in half an hour earlier every day? And she says, I can't because I have to cook for my family. And I'm like, what do you have to do? She says, I have to pack everybody's dabbas. I have to give them vegetables and I have to do these. And she says, I have to grind the masala and I have to do this. And she says, otherwise they'll spend money and eat outside and that's not okay. And I'm like, why can't you make the masalas once? And then she says, I don't have a fridge. And then I realize if she has a fridge, the atta for the chapatis, the dough can be kneaded and kept on so that it for 3 days or 4 days she doesn't have to do it. The masalas can be ground and kept. The base gravies can be done. Vegetables will last longer. You don't have to do these things. So that's a productivity tool, and that's why they're very happy to say, "Hamare ghar mein fridge hai, milk will stay longer. You don't have to buy milk that many times." So it just it frees up time and enables you to use that time for something else. If you look at cell phones as well, I mean, all you have to do is travel in local train, and you will find these women instructing maids at home, friends, neighbors. We know that carpenters, electricians, plumbers, they don't have a fixed location, but they try never to miss a call. And it's the whole thing that comes. I mean, one doesn't have to get into the. I mean, the height of the cell phone thing came home to me one day where this woman said to me that I have hired one friend. She was a fairly low income person. She said, I've hired one friend that I pay for, whose job it is to help my child cross the street and get on the bus home because the school is across the street. And I said, gosh, how does she do it? And she said she has a job somewhere in that vicinity. And so when school is getting over, my daughter will phone her. And then she will cross the road and she will pick up the child, put the child in the bus, and then she will phone my husband who works near the house. And then he will come and he will pick the child up. Now, can you imagine doing this whole drama without a phone? I mean, and so on and so forth. So I think that's why people are spending money. It's also if you have a smartphone, the number of things you can do, right? Everything from getting an OTP to visit a temple during COVID to whatever else it is that smartphones do. Plus, you'll see everybody doing the guard sitting outside the gate who's on his smartphone in the nights getting entertained. So that's where it comes from.
Right. Could you speak about dignity as a key theme in Indian consumption today?
Yeah, I think what people are saying is that I want, I want the ability to be able to build my life and put things into it that make me live not exactly like you, but so that I don't have to, have a toilet inside. I have water that comes. I live well. I eat well. My children are not left on various people's doorsteps. But so if you talk to people, they tell you, "Ghar ke andar light aata hai, pani aata hai." That's the way they describe it, right? Or the fact that nowadays, in fact, if I say to someone that would you like to take this food home, they say, no, I've got food at home. Now that's a really, really nice change, isn't it? In terms of living with dignity. So I think so to the extent that what you consume does give you dignity as well, I think is an important thing. Is an important thing for them to have. A bank account, for example. In fact, I write in my book, I think that I told, I asked my dhobi who comes, and I said, I have to give you the money. What should I do? And he said, "Khate mein dal do." In that tone, put it in my bank account. And just the fact that I was sending money to his bank account in some way sort of made him just feel bigger than he was. So, and I think that's good.
Right. What explains the popular success of the mid-length kurti?
Yeah, though now I'm thinking even beyond that, I'm seeing other trends. But essentially, if you know, in conservative homes, I think women had to be well covered, right? And everybody wanted the convenience of wearing pants and so on. But unfortunately, the shirt that went with the pant was what your neighbor would not particularly would raise eyebrows. And in many conservative places and homes, it's still not okay to wear the short shirt top. So this one is a compromise, which is so typically Indian. It's a longer shirt, but you can continue to wear the trousers. And so you get the trouser shirt look without raising eyebrows and without feeling uncomfortable in any way. It's also better for the Indian figure. But now I'm noticing that a lot of people are wearing, actually, I mean, the other day there's a website that there's a e-commerce direct to consumer brand that does fast fashion. And I looked at some of the gowns that are slit up to the thigh, and I said, "Who wears them?" And he named a particular locality, and I said, "Really, is that where people are?" To my mind, that would have been a very conservative place. But I suspect that now parents are also losing a little bit of control over their daughters in particular, and so people are, and so the experimentation has gone beyond.
Uh, I think this idea of Indians as having splintered identities, as not just many different people, but then multiple people within the same person, is under theorized. I think Jawaharlal Nehru was the best to describe India as a palimpsest, right? It is a snake that doesn't fully shed its skin. It only part sheds its skin and keeps adding layers of skin to itself. You have 4,000 years of cultural history all living concurrently today and parallelly, and
Yes.
you might find that all within the same person within the same hour. So uh, I think this is a case of Indian exceptionalism and is brutally under theorized, by academia generally, is what I think. So my next question is, where does Rama Bijapurkar, the consumer, fit in? Like, do you think of yourself as a subject of your analysis?
Hmm. Oh yeah, I'm very. I was just telling you the story of my dark glasses, right? And I think, oh gosh, I mean, I wouldn't think twice about buying diamonds for twice that amount of money, but then that's an asset. So I do think about my consumption and my consumption patterns, and I look at how my consumption patterns have changed, and that's always an interesting alert to what is going on. So, for example, when I stopped setting curd at home yogurt, which I basically from South Indian stock. So to not have yogurt set at home is like a horrible statement. And when I started buying it, then I started checking. I said, "What is the size of the yogurt market?" At that time, it was 200 crores, and I said, "How quickly did it ramp up?" And it ramped up very quickly. And I said, "Why did it ramp up?" So it gives me a lot of trigger alerts about how I'm behaving and what I'm doing.
Have you noticed any material shifts in the way that your consumer behavior has changed over the years, or has it been a gradual build-up?
My own behavior personally.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I am. Well, I'm spending more. So earlier, I never wore a sari that was more than 2 or 3 thousand rupees. Today, I would not. I would do the same impulse purchases for 12,000 rupees, whereas earlier I would never do it. But I would not want to spend 20,000 rupees on a salwar kameez. I will not spend more than 4 or 5 thousand because to me that's a waste and I don't wear it out a lot and so on and so forth. I'm finding my eating out and ordering in is on the increase. Earlier, everything was at home, whereas now I actually ask friends who are coming from other cities that are there any particular restaurants you want to order in from, and they tell me, "Oh, I want this from here and that from there," and of course, there's always Swiggy, and so that is my way of giving them joy is to order the food they want from the restaurant as compared to spend an extra 4 hours in the kitchen making my favorite dish. That is a big shift for me. It is, and I'm taking people out more often, which is also another very big shift for me. And I now understand that I have regrouped the ABC categories of people in my life. Like I always joke that in a South Indian home, if they offer you tea, if you're the prospective son-in-law and they offer you tea, they don't think very highly of you. If they offer you coffee, then we're getting somewhere. And if they offer you Horlicks, then you're definitely going to marry their daughter. So it's a little bit like that. I'm looking at my own shades and grades. But yeah, definitely. And I'm spending more on experiences. I mean, I'm spending more on holiday than I would never have spent in my life before. But somehow that trip to the Arctic is worth it, maybe because I'm getting older. So my daughter gets a free ride on it. But yes.
Is this largely representative of how consumer India changes or has changed over the last 30, 40 years? I mean, so I mean, at least in the top 10%, the top 20%, is this journey representative
It
of
is
the
representative of my generation, my social class, and what is happening. As I was saying, this dark glasses conversation is still in my head because it happened 4 days ago. But three of my friends have said exactly that: the handbags and the dark glasses and the stuff like that, and what is sensible and not sensible. It is representative. As for example, the whole air conditioning thing. My mother has air conditioners in her house. She's 93, but she will not put them on all day because she's Gandhian and she doesn't believe that she should be soft. I kind of have a twinge of guilt when the air conditioning has to come on at 9 in the morning. I'm like, at least let's wait till 11. Okay, I don't think the air conditioning ever goes off in the next generation. So I think of the generational transitions of a certain social class are clear. But I also find that I observe a lot of how consumption is done with people who are my staff or people that I see on the roads or in my home in the Nilgiris where I see a lot of tea pickers. And yeah, so I'm looking at consumption all the time. I mean, I'm looking at, I love going for a walk on crowded Warden Road in the evenings and people say, oh God, how do you walk here? And I'm like, oh, my consumer insight gets done. I love getting to airports early because I can see the new middle class at the airports. So yeah.
It is interesting that air conditioners are largely perceived as a productivity tool in Southeast Asia, countries like Singapore, where even politicians have made cases, for the air conditioner as a productivity tool in temperate climates. Do you think that it being perceived as a comfort tool in India is largely a marketing issue, or is there a deeper reason?
No, I think it's a money issue. I think it'll get there. Today it's happening with cars. Nobody wants a non-air conditioned car. As far as possible, even buses. My mate told me the other day that, oh, now I come and then I go to my village in an AC bus. Or the distinction between AC, non-AC is there. It's not that it doesn't matter. But also the other thing about air conditioners is the electricity consumption. You know, the sticker shock you get when you open your bill. And I've done a lot of research around this. And I used to keep asking that for example, the same reason we don't have heaters anywhere at home in winters in the north, if you notice. I mean, even when I go to my friends' homes, you're freezing because that stupid oil radiator is not working well enough. And I've often wondered why don't we have, so if we had the cooling as well as the heating, would the electricity bill be worth it? But honestly, if you're running an air conditioner day and night, your electricity bill is as much as 7, 8, 9,000 rupees, right? That's a lot of money. But now I understand that LG has finally made an air conditioner, has made a gadget which is both cooling and heating, which I think is exactly what we need. So I always say that the minute we can do, if you remember what revolutionized the two-wheeler industry, it was 60 kilometers a liter, right? Japanese technology that gave you power and mileage. So the minute you can give me cooling and less consumption of electricity, we will take off. Nobody likes being in the heat. The need is there.
Correct. Definitely. Uh, could you talk about the influence of Chinese imports on consumer India?
Chinese goods have really taken us by storm, right? Just the price performance point. So today, if you look at the average low income woman, if she's wearing saris or whatever, today she can have 10 of them and change them often, give away the old ones, get new ones, just the variety, the patterns, and so on and so forth because they're so cheap. The other thing is that Chinese saris in particular from China are coming with the same patterns as the Indian saris. They're not made for Vietnam dress material converted into saris. So the other day I went to a naming ceremony of someone who would be, let's say, lower middle. And I looked at all the saris they were wearing, and they were absolutely lovely, Paithani kind of saris. And I asked, where did you buy it from? And I was told that it cost just 1,000. A real Paithani, by the way, would cost 12 or 14 or 15,000 at the minimum for that pattern. And they said, oh, you get it at the Naka and it costs that much. And it's 1,000 rupees. And similarly, I went many years ago to a wedding in Aligarh. And there I saw it was a lot of dress material. All the bridesmaids were wearing purple. It was a very much lower income wedding, but it was held in the church of Northern CNI. And all the bling and everything. And I said, hey, where does all this come from? And it obviously comes from China. So I think whether you look at footwear, you look at the price performance points, whether you look at anything, innovation as well. So the footwear that makes a noise when you walk, that creaks, they wear it in the fields. You'll find it in any rural area, so that it sort of drives the snakes away. Then our little battery operated diyas that you will even find in my mother's puja room, because now you don't have to worry about anything else. Yeah, so we've seen stuff we haven't seen before. The quality is not always great, people will tell you, but the prices are really quite very, very enticing. And I've seen little children, especially. I mean, so one day I said to my male of the day at that time, I said, every day when you're coming on the train, I said, buy me one thing. And I spread it out at the end of the month, and I saw so the little scrunchies to tie up hair. And I said, how much did you pay for it? And she said, 2 rupees or 3 rupees. And then there were pouches, and then there were earrings. And then one day I also asked my secretary, we had a girl peon in the office, and I said, given how much we pay her, how come she's so well dressed and so well coordinated, complete with earrings that match? And she told me, you go to so and so market and you find that there are kurta pajama sets that are coming complete with plastic earrings of exactly the same color, and they're coming from China. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff coming in. So it has changed price. But today, there is nobody who wants my silk sarees. They're a pain in the neck to maintain, and we don't want them. So there we go.
So, I mean, we have a large, increasingly aspirational consumer base. You have all the thresholds that come with being, a lower middle income country, almost. So how are large MNCs and large Indian businesses thinking about the India opportunity?
Mostly they are, so the MNC problem is a little bit different. I think multinationals are looking for extension markets of what they already have. So the business models they have, the products they have, the R&D they have. So anything extra is extra. So as long as there are enough rich people to give them that extra, that's fine. As I wrote in my business standard column, Lamborghini sells, I don't know, X number of cars, a very small number of cars worldwide, and they sell a small number of cars in India. But the number of cars they sell in India, which is 100, is a lot for them given what they sell worldwide. But that number of people who are buying Lamborghinis is a drop in the ocean for us here. So that's how it works. So BMW says, oh, India will be my third largest market. And of course it will, because a small percentage of a large number is a large number in India. So I think multinationals are saying that whoever can afford me, I will tweak on the edges. But whoever can afford me is still larger in number than all the other markets, the incremental growth I have. So that's their math. So if you look at, are they greedy enough? And you need to be greedy in business or aspirational, if you call it that. But you need to have the greed for the full $3 trillion of GDP, of 50% of which is consumption. You should want all that. But if you're quite happy with how much pain and how much gain. So if you put a pain gain matrix, they're saying modest pain, it's always painful being in India. Modest pain, modest gain, but that modest gain is more gain than gain I would get from that same effort in another market. So why not? That's the way their logic works. And I've written about this in all my books. Large Indian companies are also very happy serving the top of the pyramid. And it is true that rich India is growing richer. So it's not like there's no growth there. So I call it, I mean, the story of the Frog Prince, they basically say that why should I kiss a frog saying that it will become a prince one day when I can kiss the prince directly. So I think that's where they are, which is why, as I've said, the rest of India has been left to the small businesses and the small guys, the regional guys, the local guys who are doing very well. Thank you.
You've been working closely with corporate executives and the boards of these large companies for a good part of the last 2 decades. What has changed in the thinking and the way in which they approach India?
So I've addressed practically every visiting board of every large multinational that comes. In the early days, it was outright hostility. They would say, "Why do we need you when we've got China?" Now they don't say that anymore. Earlier, it used to be, "Yeah, this is all very interesting." But I remember there used to be a company called LifeScan that made blood glucose monitoring equipment. And I remember he said that if the government of India doesn't think this is a priority disease, and if your consumers are not yet ready to take their health seriously, he said, "What am I doing here?" Whereas we are, unfortunately, among the world's largest diabetic population, right? So that used to be the orientation. And then I had a CEO friend who used to say that I want to influence strategy development policy. He worked for multinational, and I said, "What the hell is strategy development policy?" And he said, "They lump me with APAC, Asia Pacific region. They lump me with Middle East and North Africa, and so it's the lowest common denominator that comes to me. I have to choose from what I have to choose." And a lot of APAC, as you know, Koreans and Vietnamese and so on and so forth, per capita incomes are much higher than us, and their issues are different. Their sense of what they want, the sense of style, what they need, it's all very different. So that used to be the language then. And now I think nobody is asking, why should I come to India? Why India? So we don't have to sit and defend India. I think people are also now beginning to listen more carefully to why matrix organizations don't work, why you need a one India. So you will see that in a lot of new structures that are emerging. What I think hasn't changed to the best of my knowledge is I've also been saying that you need a different set of metrics to evaluate India. Because if you stick to a margin, you'll get a small volume. You should learn to have a large volume with a razor thin margin and manage that business. So I don't think, and you need to be able to invest a little bit for a longer haul for a hockey stick shape of growth. If we want instant karma, it's not happening. So I think some of that is yet to change, but definitely it's a lot more polite. But the rich getting richer is making people say, "Why do I need to go to the middle at all?" Which is a good question.
Is platform aggregation the playbook to unlocking the Indian mass market?
Yes. Yes, in fact, as I have said in the third section of my book, Lilliput Land, so far we've all been struggling with price, performance, profit. Indian consumer says, "This is all I have, but I'm not willing to settle for anything less," because we've been spoiled, as I've written in my book, we've been spoiled by Amazon, we've been spoiled by China, we've been spoiled by the first 10 years after 15 years after liberalization. If you remember, from 16 rupees a minute for telecom calls, now it's, I don't know, practically free. If you remember how much money it costs to fly, now if you plan carefully and if you're willing to tolerate basic service levels, for 4,000 rupees, you can do a return trip to Chandigarh. So I think the quality of everything went up, the prices came down. So consumers are actually quite monstrous. So this price performance and the company wanting profit was just not working out. Then small ticket sizes, companies were like, "I can't afford, even banks used to talk about cost income ratio. The cost to service this bank account that has such little money is just not good enough for me. The cost of selling small ticket sizes is not good enough, which is where the sachets came. So now with the digital economy and the platform aggregation and so on, I think that's finally got cracked because you can aggregate small suppliers. You can aggregate small suppliers to bring down your costs. You can yoke them digitally. You crash all costs digitally. What does it cost to do a KYC today? Practically nothing. Nobody even comes to your house, right? What does it cost for a rural bank branch? No bricks and mortar, and so on and so forth. So I think with digital processes and with aggregating small suppliers, you've been able to crash costs. With aggregating small consumers into larger buying units, you've been able to simulate the large consumer, so you crash costs again. So I think the price performance profit is actually going to happen. It's going to happen, and it has been market tested and demonstrated, and also the sharing economy. So if you recall, we talked about stretch for more, not settle for less. So the person saying, "I want a car, I want a part of an air conditioned car. I can't afford the whole car, but when I take my family to a wedding, I want to take them in a nice car." there that the sharing is common. Similarly, clothes. Nowadays, I'm told that there's a lot of clothes hiring that's happening even for weddings and all that kind of stuff. So you take the clothes, you do the social media, you take the photographs, and honestly, who wears their wedding clothes again? I mean, I gave away the wedding jewelry my mother-in-law gave me when my daughter got married. She didn't want that jewelry either, so we had to convert it. So, so I think that is the way to go. So I'm very, very excited with that development, because if you can manage price, performance, profit, then you crack the mass market.
Thank you for answering that. I have a final question, and this is a ritual that I'm having on these conversations. For a leader in consumer India today, what would you say is the most important leadership challenge of our time?
Of consumer goods companies, you mean? Of consumer
Yeah,
goods?
no, any
Okay.
leader looking to build a business targeting consumer India.
Targeting consumer India. Yes. I mean, the most obvious answer is consumer insight, of which there's so little, because I go to war saying, I sit through strategy presentations at boards where the word consumer doesn't exist, except in the mission statement that says we will delight consumers. I sit through presentations that say we are consumer first and the consumer's in the center. And all around there are spokes of what they will do, which is I will cross sell, I will get a larger share of the pie, I will do this. So I'm all about you looking at how to extract. That's not customer centricity. It's how you add value and extract value. Let's hear that. So I think that mindset has yet to come. And it will come with competition. It will come when the product stops being the hero of the story. So I think a great deal of consumer sensitivity is very, very important. I think this whole value orientation. How does the consumer process value? Is she or he processing value the same way I'm processing value? Can I get inside their heads and think about what, for example, the amount of talk we hear about oh, Gen Z, Gen Y, millennials, they do this, they do this, they do this. That's why I'm doing my youth study, by the way. When I've shut down my office because I'm going to Vanaprastha. So I'm going off into the forest to say, now I have worked hard enough. But what I did was, whatever rent I saved, I said, now I'm going to gift myself surveys. I'm a nerd. So the youth survey was one of them in response to this, because you have a notion of a Gen XYZ that you borrowed from somewhere, which is the creamy layer. But actually, the poor Gen Z of the lower income wants a government job, wants a steady job, is the first generation college goer of the family, is usually married. I'm putting out demographic data that says that your famous youth market is a lot of people who are householders who already have children. Right? So I think to stop being, make beautiful hypotheses with ugly facts, and to really, really, really operate in the world of the consumer. And let's embrace our demographics, is what I would say to leaders, that embrace the demographics. It is the way it is. Now, you can pick and choose what you want, but please do more sophisticated segmentation, spend more time on consumer insight, ask what is this doing for the consumer, how's the consumer thinking about this. So I think that is the one thing that I really want to do. The second is, I'm saying, get a reality check. You don't build brands, all these D2C brands, and I'm building brands in 6 months and 3 months. That a trademark and a label is not a brand. There is no instant karma to brands. Kit Kat is 100-year-old brand and still doing well. What does it take to build those brands? It takes patience, it takes investment, it takes understanding what a brand actually is. So I'm saying, talk the talk by all means, but please walk the walk as well. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Rama Ma'am. Fantastic note to end the conversation. Thank you so much for your time and generosity.
And thank you for your sharp questions. Thank you for reading the book. And thank you very much for having me here. And offline, please tell me why you're interested in this stuff.